Hi. Hi. Hello? I don't know.
You just can't hear it on the stage.
Oh, there it is.
Okay.
That's good. Good. Okay.
I wanted to start by asking you about when you first took on the role of Amy. What was it about her personality or what you read in the script that made it feel like a really important part for you to play?
I liked that she was the chief of staff because that is really a unique kind of trajectory for somebody who in her 30s. So I liked what all of that implied. I liked that it implied that she could be in over her head, that somehow she was some sort of wunderkind on the Hill, that made it to the top administrative position, and yeah, that I think was the most intriguing to me, and then just what that spoke of her relationship to Selina previous to the series ever beginning, and those are the things that kind of struck me. I liked those things.
Yeah, and I've heard you talk about some of the prep work that you did and some of the background that you decided upon, that they'd worked together for a long time.
Yeah.
Like, how much prep did you do as the seasons went on in developing where her story was going? And
Well,
did you have to adjust her backstory at any point?
You definitely have to adjust backstory. That's like the funniest thing about doing a series is you when you're used to doing plays or films that are like finite, you kind of are like, okay, well, this is what I know, and some stuff you can changes as you do shows, as you do like a play where like you can find things just sort of energetically with people, but like the story's the same, the character's the same. You have all the prep in the beginning and you just kind of play with it and go. Whereas on a series, I did the whole same thing. I did like, oh well, this is probably where she's from, and like what she studied and where she studied, and this is probably her family members and this and that. And even the first season, in her office, we had like a photo of like two gentlemen, and I was like, oh, those are her brothers, and that's why she's like such a ball buster, and that's why she's, you know what I mean? And then we have Sophie and like no brothers, show up, and I think originally I thought that maybe she was like from like upstate New York or something, and then when her dad had a stroke, he was conveniently in George Washington University Hospital, and so I was like, oh, so they live here and they're like of this animal. So then I had to change the whole idea that like, oh, maybe he's a lobbyist and that's why she's the way she is, and they live in McLean, and so yeah, you do adjust the whole history.
Did you decide upon anything for her story between the end of season 6 and the current season, since there are a few months missing story-wise in between?
Oh, I figured not a lot. I mean, but because as you just saw, she sort of is still trying to even just grab Dan to touch base. I'm assuming that she's that she's tried to get his attention a few times, or that this is what I've assumed, and Reid can say, I think we agree on this, but I've assumed that they did discuss it, that they decided what they were going to do, and then she started to waver, and so then it was like, well, now I need to touch base with him again in private. So that's kind of, I assumed there was at least one conversation about how they'd proceed. But that's all I've really, I didn't have to adjust any like backstory at all. Like that was pretty established by 7, yeah.
And I know that people love the chemistry between you and Reid, and that you did some chemistry reads together at the beginning. Do you remember what any of the scenes were that you did together?
Gosh, I think I'm trying to remember the pilot and stuff. I think, it was a scene that didn't make it in. It was a scene, that's why I'm going, wait. It was a scene where we were in, I think the rotunda of one of the state buildings, and we were having a discussion about the date or dates that we'd gone on, and how just how ambitious he was and this and that, and didn't make it in. So it's all been up to audience interpretation, I suppose, which is super fun.
But it obviously still worked out chemistry-wise. Was
So.
there any difference when you first came onto the show working with Armando Iannucci, because you'd worked with him before on In the Loop?
Yeah.
Were there any kind of like driving questions that you were asking him about how things were going to run differently with VEEP?
I didn't ask him how it would run differently. He does have a very established process, and that's the process that I die for. I love it so much. And before we got before we booked this, or I don't know who all of us, because we were all together in this casting process too. So I'm just like, before the cast was put together, I'll put it that way. I had written in like a journal somewhere, like in despair, in professional despair, just like, can I ever just work with Armando Iannucci again? I just want to work with Armando Iannucci. And I didn't find that journal entry again until after the first season of VEEP was finished wrapping. And so I found that and I was like, oh my God. So it just goes to show you that, like, I really was game for everything he was going to put us through, and I had already been through it, and I loved it. So I was much less, I think, skittish about that process. I think a lot of our other cast members, I think they would. I don't like speaking for other people, but I do think they would agree that yeah, they were a little more nervous about, like, wait, how is this going to work, and what do you mean, and what do you mean we're going to improv but not come up with jokes, and like it was different, and yeah, so just having been, for me, having been through it once before, that was different. You know what I mean? Because when I did In the Loop, I was the newbie. So yeah, that felt different. I was able to really trust and even kind of like talk some of the other cast members through it a little bit. Yeah.
And when you have one of your fellow cast members as an executive producer, as Julia is on the show, does that change and kind of offer you anything additional as cast that you don't get when that's not the case?
That did change. That was also different, because she, Julia is not just producer in name only. Like, she is very meticulous, and her notes always make it better. So it's like, no matter what, when you know that there's going to be note sessions and you guys all have to be asked to leave the room, like, that it's because she's seen stuff that she really is going to help improve. And but it was different because because within the loop, and it was Arm and the writers, and that was it. And so there was no any kind of like other input. And so having Julia also be such an important part of the process, that is what changed. What creates what you see, and why it is different than what you see, maybe from some of the British shows and that Arm did. So yeah, it becomes like a little perfect little chemistry.
And were you all coming in with a medley of different improv styles and different comedy styles from your different trainings and backgrounds?
Yeah, and some of us didn't have any comedy styles or training, like myself. I never did improv training or anything. Kevin Dunn and Gary Cole were all classically trained actors, and so I know all of we were always like put next to somebody like Matt Walsh. Or like Dan Backadall, and Tim is a phenomenal improviser as well. But he was also classically trained in and did a lot of theater in Chicago, and then he ended up doing improv once he went to LA. But yeah, like everybody had a different school, and of course Julia with SNL, like everybody had a different take and a different way of adding to the process, for sure. I always really rested on the comfort of not having to come up with jokes, because we had these brilliant writers who were coming up with the funniest stuff. The way that someone like I would do it is you improv in a kind of like Meisner-y way, where your character, your intention, you're just playing to see where it lives, and then they pull from that. So yeah, and then it's scripted. Once you see it on, it's mostly scripted what you see on television. Yeah.
I've heard interviews, though, where they've talked about how sometimes they'll just shout out different lines to you during a scene.
Oh.
Is that kind of fun to do, because it just doesn't give you a second to think about your delivery?
It's totally fun. It's totally fun. It's totally fun. I think that always freaked out our guest actors more than it freaked us out, because they kind of, because you prepare something, and if you're, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, say this instead, or open the suitcase and now it's full of dildos, and you're like, what is happening? And so it's, but yeah, it is super fun. And, and especially in the last season, when I mean, so many of the things were like extra, revered, knowing that it was the last time you do it. So every time Dave, because the way Dave would do it, because Arm and the writers had alts, but they would, present them in one way. Dave would, by the end, he just would kind of choose a corner that wasn't being shot and just sit there and just throw like alts the whole time for like a couple takes, And once you would see him like come in and just like, all right, we're gonna like plant himself down and just like, oh, we're doing an alt take, we're doing a bunch of alts, like. It was fun. It was super fun. Yeah.
Do you have less awareness of where the camera is on a show like this because it's an ensemble cast and you're all in the scenes together? So it's just kind of moving around with a lot more wide shots as well.
Absolutely. And also, it was with Arm. His whole vision is to not have blocking, to not have staging, to be so loose, basically to create life and then shoot a documentary. It's that you're not shooting documentary style. Like it actually just is a documentary. And so yeah, you got really used to not having marks for like a couple years, and then every once in a while, like you'd like have a different DP or you'd have a different. And then once the regime changed too, then it was very Los Angeles and very like But I mean, a lot of our camera guys would tell me like that really wasn't that strict. Like every once in a while, we would tell you to like move a little bit. You know what I mean? But for us, the contrast with how we began, it did feel like more marks. But yes, even then. Even at the very end, it was still, it is pretty loose. Like they were so great about acting around us because we weren't acting for pretty, at all. You don't, and not in this show. Yeah.
I'm really interested in the changeover when David Mandel came in, and I was reading the Hollywood Reporter oral history that just came out, which is amazing. It's really fantastic.
Everyone just let it out, man.
But everyone was very open that the first table read didn't feel like it was gelling and didn't feel like it was working, but obviously then it did come together and it worked incredibly well.
Yeah.
So what do you think really shifted and changed from that first read?
Well, it's funny because I from my recollection, we read 2 episodes. The first one actually did kind of keep the tone, and then the second one was like reading a different type of sitcom, and that was when everybody was, and then I remember like then it was just like, well, we're not going to do any more rehearsal, and you can go home, and for me, home was New York, and so it was just like, oh my gosh, I just came out here, but yeah. I don't know. I think he explains it pretty well in that piece. Dave explains in this piece in the Hollywood Reporter that he realized, and he and the writers realized that instead of it being like all of the episodes being character driven, they were driven by the external happenings that in these characters' world. So we're a reactive show in a way, and I was milling about that in my head once I read it, and I was like, it's true. Arm always used to talk about how he loved plot. Like plot was his favorite thing, like figuring out how this went here and that went here and then tying it all together and how does it tie together and oh my gosh, that's very external. It's not like, character decides to, I don't know, falls in love and gets married. Like it's not about the character making a decision. It's about stuff happening to them and then how they react. So I think once Dave kind of cracked that code, he felt like he was able to preserve that tone. So, and he did. I thought he preserved it pretty well, while also really bringing in their own voices and their own interests, and bringing in more character and bringing in a little bit more protagonist style writing. So, yeah.
And I know politically, obviously, everyone's been talking to you guys a lot about how the landscape has changed in the last couple of seasons. Yeah. Do you feel like their situations had to get more absurd in order to seem believable, almost?
It's certainly, I don't know, like there's a chicken and egg thing there of like, well, did it open the door for us to be more absurd? Did it require us to be more absurd? I think there is an element of, just everything got more extreme and got louder and and brassier in life. And so as you saw in that first episode of this season, it's like it is an assault, and and so is every time you turn on the TV just to check current events. Like that's an assault too. And so yeah, I think that if we are the satire that is reflecting life, art reflecting life, I think we'd be remiss to not to fight that in a way. I think that we did have to carry on in that sort of agita that we sort of all have societally right now, Yeah.
And in terms of some of the conversations that you've all had with politicians and with their staffers along the way, are there any that really stand out as being quite memorable for how the show tapped into what they're doing?
I don't know. I think a lot of the other guys kind of honed in on actual funny moments that happened with like people they talked to, and Laura Schiller was instrumental to me in the beginning. She's Barbara Boxer's chief of staff, and she really, like, we would get on the phone and she would just tell me about what I just needed to know about the job, because we were doing a workplace satire. Like, it was about office politics even more than it was about global politics, really. And so it was really important to me as the boss of this office, just like what the day-to-day is, what her motivations are, when she gets up. And she was just like, it's putting out fires. You are a fireman. That is what you are. Like, it's just putting out fires the whole time. And and that's and she used to say, and that's, oh well, Laura's where the phone came from, because she never ever let go of her phone. And this was this was still in BlackBerry days, where like this is kind of pre-iPhone a little bit, so like we weren't all doing that yet, and I just noticed that she had a bag, but the phone never went in her bag. It was just always in her hand. And she did say, she was like, it's like a leash, because the phone allows me to go and have my own life and take care of my kids. She's a mother and a wife, and as well as being a chief of staff. And she, so it allows her to leave the office, but at the same time, it keeps her constantly tethered. So that's where Amy's phone appendage came from. Was from.
Do you think Amy has any true ability for work-life separation in her future?
Oh. I mean, obviously we were just getting started with this season, and Amy has a lot of places to go, which is wonderful. I'm so grateful for that. But I don't know. I think she figures out a way by the end of this season of like how to not even have to answer that really annoying question anymore. I think, she's figured out a way that like life is work, but work is life, and she's actually fine with it. Like, I don't know. In a different way, though, than when she was younger. Whether we like it or not, you'll see what I mean.
Yeah. Given that she works in such a toxic work environment, and she's clearly very intelligent, what's the underlying reason that she stays and keeps coming back?
God, Amy. I think Amy is somebody, she's so hyper competitive. I think all she cares about from the womb on was to just win. She just wants to win all the time. And I think that it just like kills her, the idea that she, may have left unfinished business at any point. Like when she quits, we're all so happy for her, and it's a great scene to watch. But I think that kills her, because it's like, well, I'm not running a campaign that could potentially win. It's just, she's just always going to get back into trying to get what she wants, which is just to win. So I really think it's like, if there was ever a failure in her head, she's like, well, I'm going to go and fix that. I'm going to go and fix the hell out of that. So there is like a perverse, this is not conscious to her, by the way. She's very much one of these people who like behaves, very differently than she thinks she does, but I think subconsciously it's just, she like, I'm going to make Selina love me, and I'm going to make her thank me. You know what I mean? And it's like, okay, honey, like, okay. Like,
she's like, I don't want you to win without me.
Right. It's like we got to the White House, but how, it's just, it's like it's ego. It's ego. She needs to be the one. Yeah.
Are there any lessons that you feel like you've really learned as a performer in getting to spar opposite Julia so often?
I mean, I just, it's just encouraging that you can be I think it's established, anybody who's paying attention knows that she's just like the hardest worker on the planet. Like she is just so motivated by work, and she's amazing, and we're better for that. But I think it's encouraging to see how such a hard worker can really commit to play. Because this is what we do. We play. Like, it's you sign up to do a play, you sign up to do a screenplay or a teleplay, and so she knows that. She's never forgotten it. When you do the scene, she is absolutely present and there with you because we're all in the same sandbox. And I think that has to be what has fed her this whole time, and thereby what feeds us when we watch and blessedly when we work with her. So yeah, it's play.
And also for you, you've done a lot of guest star appearances in shows,
Sure.
whether it's Law & Order or 30 Rock. Are you approaching that any differently? Or are you still just walking into it and being like, I'm going to do all of the background, create this character, have the full prep, and kind of go through the whole process as it is?
With guesting, you do sort of do that. You have a little bit more, because with guesting, you're most likely not going to have this like 7-year trajectory. And so you can kind of approach it a little bit more, almost the way you would an audition, where you're like, well, I'm going to go for the day, and this is what I got, and we'll see how that goes, and then it'll be done. You know what I mean? Yeah. So that's kind of when you're a day player, when you're visiting, yeah, you kind of do have a little bit more of like a solitary discovery of everything that you're doing, and because everybody on the set who's been doing the show has been doing it and they have their eyes on other stuff, they just need you to come and be prepared and deliver. So it's not a lot of like, hey, can we talk, and what are we building here? It's like, no. Like, yeah, like, you're an FBI agent, you know how to shoot a gun, like, you figure it out. You know what I mean?
Is there anything you've learned that's kind of made auditioning a more comfortable process for you throughout the years?
Sure, several. I mean, I think, one, the attitude of this is your chance to, like, if you're in this to perform because you love to perform, this is your chance to perform for 10 minutes, to a half hour. That's, and that's it. That's the moment. Like, that's your work for the day. And whether or not you get to continue that role or not, or work with that person, it doesn't matter, because that's the moment, is like you just performed and worked on something. And it might go well, it might not, but you still worked on it. So that's for me, the best way to approach an audition. And then, also, there is that aspect of like you also are auditioning them. Like, and I know that people are like, oh, that's just a psych out, but there is that element, because it's like when you go on an audition and you might love a character and you have a vision for it, and then they're like, yeah, play her completely different. And you will, because you want to work on this today, and this is what you're doing today, but deep down you're like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm not going to play Cordelia that way. Like, what are you talking about? And like, that's okay. You know what I mean? So it's like, then you sort of know, like, oh, well, I don't know, maybe I didn't want to do that, that particular job or whatever, and that can get a lot worse in the case of, I think some women, or especially, but also men will, but like people will sort of be abused in an audition, you know what I mean, and asked to do things that are not professional or something. And then it's like, okay, not working for you, thank you. So there is that element of auditioning the auditioners, or auditioning the auditors, anyway, and because you're the auditioner, anyway, and then I do believe in the whole, like, talking to yourself and having I'm very methodical, so I do the whole, like, what worked, what didn't work, what will I do on the next audition, and I write those out, and I, like, keep it in a log, and then the sides go away, and I don't look at them, and that's the process. Like, just have a very, very distinct thing that you do with those sides, so that you're not just always like, oh, I don't know, maybe, and I don't know, maybe that thing will, it's like, okay. Actually, what I do is I write the date. I write a week ahead, so that in case there's a callback, I still have the work of the sides. I still have the notes, because I make notes on my sides. So I'll keep them for like a week. But then once the week is done, out, like, you're gone. So yeah, I don't know. That's what I do.
No, that's a great process. I was also reading an interview where you were talking about how taking a step away for a few years and going to college changed your motivation for acting. What shifted and what changed in terms of what motivated you in your career?
I mean, well, when you're young, you're not. Even if you think you're doing this for you, like you're not, because you just haven't grown yet. Like you're not a grown up yet, and you're doing this to please the adults, or you're doing this because you've never known anything else. And dreams are great. I think the dreams of like, oh, I love Betty Davis. Like, can I please be Betty Davis when I grow up? That's great. Keep it. You know what I mean? That's like definitely use that your whole life. Like that's a good dream. But you're working on somebody else's journey. You're not really working on your own as a kid. And so, so being away from it, it was everything, because I was able to then come, to New York, not pursuing acting, but seeing tons of plays, tons of shows, and just really being genuinely connected to those performances. And then it was like, oh, that's what acting is? It's not a popularity contest, and it's not whether or not I'm pretty enough for the casting directors to book me. It's not about booking. It's not all that stuff as a kid. It's like, oh, this is just about connecting text to an audience and being a bridge for story. And I'm like, that's noble. And I don't care if I ever book, as long as I just get to pursue that craft and that art. So yeah, that's I mean, I find that to be a world of difference. So I'm glad that I came to it as a grown-up.
I love it. I'm going to go to a few questions that we have from the audience.
Sure.
The first one is from Frank, who was asking, do you expect to return to the theater, and do you have a bucket list role, if so?
I always expect to return. I crave being on the boards, and I crave just being in a scene with a scene partner and just doing the work. And that's, so I always expect, well, I always hope to. And I bucket list role, I mean, like there's plenty, but I mean, Rosalind and I don't know if I'm, see, sometimes like you start to age out of things. Well, someday I'll do Mother Courage, right? Someday. Yeah, and then everything in between.
We've got the next several years planned out.
Elena, yeah.
I have one from David, who is asking about how much you've researched the world of politics. Like, what did you feel like it was important for you to know?
For VEEP?
For VEEP.
Wow, I'm sorry. I'm very plosive on this mic, and I apologize to anybody who's offended by it. I did enough research, again, to figure out Amy's choices. I wanted to know, I studied international relations in college, so I didn't know much about domestic politics as much as I did global politics. So, like, Liza in The Loop was a little bit more like just like falling off my chair than, because I kind of knew all of the stuff she'd be writing and things. But yeah, I needed to learn a little bit more about how domestic politics works and how the staffing works, what a legislative director is, what special counsel is, all these different things that I figured Amy would have to know, and that she'd be hiring and firing for, and also how she probably came up into the chief of staff position. So I did that, and I don't know. And then the rest, you sort of, like, plot-wise, if you have a question, you can Google it, which is great. You don't have to like spend a day at the library like we probably had to like 50 years ago if you had a question. So but that's a very organic and natural research. But I really did in the beginning have to figure out just how hiring and firing goes on the Hill. Yeah.
I have a question from AJ asking, because you've had such a prolific and rich acting career, have you ever considered writing and or directing, even if it was a short film?
Yeah, I've considered it. I consider it a lot. No, what this is going to sound, I don't know, left field to probably maybe many, but I really want to direct opera. I love opera, and I always have ideas. So I don't know. That's something, I don't know. That's a bucket list for me a little bit. But yeah, I do consider it. There's two. I'm the type of person, though, who the only reason why I consider it is because I want to see those things and I want to see them done well. And so if no one else is going to do it, then I guess I got to do it. You know, so there are like 2 books that I'm attached to that I'm always pitching and I'm always selling that I've done treatments for and things. And that's one of those things where it's like, well, if this takes 20 years, then I'll be aged out, but I will direct them, you know. And then I always have ideas. I've got a whole bunch of, you know, but I have a whole list of things and different screenplays that I try writing. But you know, I try to not put too much pressure on myself, just because, you know, time.
Development takes a long time, as you've learned.
Time is a funny thing, but I don't know. Einstein says it's elastic, so we can work on that, I guess.
I wanted to end by talking a little bit about shooting the final scenes and shooting the final episode. Mm-hmm. I saw a beautiful photo where there were about 200 people. It was like all the cast and crew and their family there for the final scene. Could you talk a little bit about what the tone was and how it was that last day on set?
I mean, it was palpable is not a word because all that means is that you could feel it. So great. We could feel it. It was just a buzz, you know, and in that picture, you know, but it's the whole 2 weeks. It was just emotion city. I mean, and which was great because I need to do that. Like, I'm a big feelings person. So like when the green light went up for like crying and hugging all episode, I was just down. I was like, thank you. It was so nice. It was so nice to just, you know, have any kind of like guardedness just taken away, and we could all just be together and hug, and it was a very like emotionally intimate experience with 150 people. But it was, and it was just, I don't know, like I can't express, I mean, what it is to just like hug that much. It was awesome.
It's been 8 years of your life.
Yeah. Everybody, all of our lives were changed by this. All of our lives were changed by this is unique, and you don't run into this at the workplace that often. And we all knew that, and we all really wanted to revere that. So.
And finally, what are you going to miss most about playing Amy?
I think the thing I liked that I probably will miss down the road is just like the aggression, just like the ability to just be like, I hate all of you in this room, you know, character, and you know, just to be able to let that be her like, you know, because in life we try to be much less judgmental and kind, and you know, and respectful. But so it was sort of a nice little trip to be able to just be an a-hole. And not worry about it so much.
Well, I'm glad that Amy gets to be an asshole for one more season, which is airing on HBO on Sundays. Thank you so much for coming out tonight.
Thank you, guys.